3 days before her retirement pension could vest, 61-year-old compliance officer Melody Reynolds was unceremoniously fired by the very company she'd safeguarded for nearly 3 decades. But Grew Manufacturing underestimated her. Beneath her calm demeanor lay 4 years of damning evidence, a fireproof lockbox of secrets, and the resolve of a woman who had spent a lifetime watching others play dirty and documenting every move. When truth becomes the last line of defense, revenge isn't loud. It's legal, strategic, and unstoppable. I had exactly 3 days left. 3 days until my pension would vest. Until the decades I had poured into Grew Manufacturing would finally amount to a comfortable, secure retirement. Instead, I found myself sitting in front of David Langston on a rainy Friday afternoon in April, facing the end of my career with nothing but a manila folder and an empty smile. "How long have you been with us, Melody?" David asked, reclining in his plush leather chair, hands folded over his stomach. He sounded casual, even friendly, as though we were chatting over coffee rather than discussing the sudden end of my professional life. I straightened my back and met his eyes. 29 years and 362 days. He nodded slowly. "That's quite the accomplishment." I followed his gaze to the folder on the desk. My stomach twisted. In all my years at Grew, I had never been summoned to a director's office on a Friday afternoon. Something was wrong. Wrong. "My name is Melody Reynolds. I'm 61 years old. Until 5 minutes ago, I was the senior compliance officer at one of Steady Paul's largest manufacturing companies. For nearly 3 decades, I was the quiet force behind our legal operations, reading every regulation, documenting every irregularity, and pushing back when management preferred to bend the rules for the sake of quarterly profits. My work wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. It was honest. It mattered. David pushed a folder across the polished desk. "Due to budget constraints, we're letting you go. Effective immediately." He didn't look at me as he said it. His fingers tapped the desk rhythmically, almost nervously. I blinked, feeling the room tilt. Budget constraints. Grew had just announced record-breaking profits last quarter. Something didn't add up. No, this wasn't a layoff. It was a hit. He tapped the folder again. "This is your severance package. Sign it by tomorrow, or you get nothing. HR will escort you to your desk." That was it. 29 years reduced to a pink slip and an ultimatum. I should have cried, yelled, begged, but instead, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. David had timed this perfectly. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, rising with the folder in hand. I didn't bother opening it. Let him think I was blind to his strategy. David looked startled by my composure, his mouth twitching as though he expected a breakdown. But I had spent years examining patterns, predicting moves, and reading between lines. I knew what this was. With my head held high, I walked out. Janet from HR was already waiting, eyes apologetic, fingers clutching a clipboard. I gave her a thin smile as I packed my things: a photo of Thomas, my late husband, a potted plant my daughter Elizabeth gave me when she left for college, the plaque I'd received for 25 years of service. It all fits neatly into a cardboard box. "I'm so sorry, Melody," Janet whispered. Her voice wavered. "This isn't right." "It is what it is," I replied softly. But inside, I knew better. It wasn't right. And it wasn't legal, because for the past 4 years, I had been documenting something far more dangerous than a budget cut. I drove home slowly through the rainy streets of Steady Paul. The familiar neighborhoods rolled past like faded photographs, places that had witnessed the milestones of my life. The cathedral where Thomas and I married is now shadowed and gray. The community park where Elizabeth took her first steps. The grocery store where I'd shopped every Saturday since 1995. It was surreal, the way the world continued normally while everything inside me trembled. My modest home stood just as I'd left it that morning, warm yellow light spilling from the porch lantern. I sat in the driveway for several minutes, staring at the front door, trying to summon the strength to walk inside and face the silence that waited beyond it. When I finally stepped inside, I placed the cardboard box on the hallway bench and slipped out of my coat. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a comfort, but also a reminder of how long I had been alone. I made tea, not because I needed it, but because the ritual grounded me. Old Grey, 2 sugars, a splash of milk. I carried the cup to the kitchen table and opened the folder David had given me. The severance agreement was worse than I'd imagined. 3 months' salary, no continuation of health care, no mention of accrued leave, and most damning of all, a requirement that I waive any right to pursue legal action or claims including pension disputes. It was a trap dressed as a favor. I reread the language 3 times. They wanted me gone, quietly and permanently, but I was not going quietly. I rose, walked to the study, and opened the cabinet where I kept my records. Behind the framed photos and family albums was a fireproof lockbox. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, 4 years of documentation, photocopies of falsified loan applications, emails from mid-level managers suggesting reports be massaged to meet quarterly expectations. Quality control logs were signed after products had already shipped. Instructions from David, always verbal, never written but reflected in the patterns I'd meticulously recorded. Over 1,000 pages. I hadn't planned to use any of it. Not until now. I scrolled through my contacts and found his name. Gregory Santos, the man I hadn't spoken to in years. Former Group Chief Financial Officer, now working for the Securities and Exchange Commission. I hovered over his number for a long moment, then pressed call. Gregory answered after 2 rings. Melody? His voice was cautious at first, as though unsure whether he was hearing correctly. I hadn't called in nearly 6 years, but time hadn't dimmed the clarity of his tone. Gregory, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need your help. For the next 2 hours I laid out everything. The termination, the severance package, the timing of my pension, and most importantly, the evidence. He listened without interrupting, his occasional questions focused and precise. By the end of our conversation, his tone had shifted from curious to concerned. This isn't just unethical, he said. This could constitute securities fraud. The backdated reports alone, Melody. This could open up an entirely new investigation. I told him about the files, the notes, the patterns I'd traced. I explained how every time I flagged an issue internally, it was buried, filed away, or returned with instructions to focus on more pressing matters. They were hoping I'd retire quietly, I said. They thought 3 days from vesting would be enough incentive to take the severance. They underestimated you, he replied. By the end of the call, we had a plan. I would meet with Gregory and his team first thing Monday morning. Until then, he advised me to make multiple copies of everything and store them in separate locations. And most importantly, not to sign anything. They'll try to pressure you, he said. Don't respond. Let them sweat. That night, I didn't sleep, but I didn't cry either. I printed, organized, indexed. I made 3 complete packages, 1 for the SEC, 1 for my records, and 1 I'd keep hidden as leverage. When the phone rang the next morning, I didn't need to check the caller ID. Melody, it's David. We need you to return that paperwork today. I can swing by if it helps. I didn't reply. A few hours later, another call, this time from legal. Miss Reynolds, you are required to sign the agreement by the close of business. Failure to do so may result in forfeiture of your severance benefits. They were getting nervous. At 4:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. I peeked through the peephole. David Langston. Melody, he called. This is ridiculous. Let's be reasonable. Sign the papers and we can all move on. I didn't answer. I watched as he slipped another envelope into my mailbox and then returned to his luxury car. Inside the envelope, the same agreement, with a handwritten note, final opportunity, signed by 9 o'clock a.m. Monday. I placed it on the table untouched. Then I made myself another cup of tea. I sat down and called Elizabeth. Our weekly Saturday chats were routine, but this time, I couldn't pretend. She sensed something in my voice immediately. Mom, what's wrong? I was terminated yesterday, I said simply. There was a pause. What? But you're days from retiring. They can't do that. They did, I replied, quiet but firm. But I'm not going down without a fight. Her voice cracked with concern. Do you want me to fly in? I can be there by tomorrow. No, sweetheart. I've got this. I do. I hung up and returned to the evidence. I reviewed every file again, making sure it was indexed, complete, and easily presentable. By Sunday night, my briefcase was packed. My resolve had never been stronger. I was ready for Monday. The weekend felt like standing in the eye of a storm, everything calm on the surface, but trembling with tension beneath. Saturday morning, I woke before sunrise, the quiet of the house settling like dust on old memories. I brewed a pot of coffee and stared out my kitchen window at the rain-slicked street. 3 decades of integrity, 3 days from my pension, and a pile of damning evidence. They had no idea what they'd unleashed. I spent the day copying and organizing documents. 1,000 pages of reports, memos, spreadsheets, and emails, each sorted into a neat chronological index. It was exhausting, methodical work, but it was what I knew, what I'd always known. It reminded me I was not powerless. By mid-afternoon, I had 3 complete packages, one for the SEC, one for my records, one to serve as leverage if things turned personal. I placed the third set in a separate lockbox at my bank's safe deposit vault. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed a man in a gray suit watching me. When our eyes met, he looked away. My heart pounded. Paranoia? Or surveillance? Back home, I reviewed the severance letter again. Its language was chilling. Clean, corporate, manipulative. It read like a threat disguised as a handshake. Then the calls started. First Janet from our Melody. Please, we need you to sign that paperwork today. Then David. Let's be adults about this, Melody. No one wants a scene. Then the general counsel. Failure to sign may jeopardize your benefits. We advise you to reconsider. Each voice was more desperate than the last. By 4:30 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I peeked through the curtains. David Langston, standing on my porch holding another manila envelope. Melody, come on. Be reasonable. Just sign the damn thing. We all walk away clean. I didn't answer. After a minute, he stuffed the envelope in my mailbox and stormed off. Inside the envelope was the same severance agreement, but this time, it came with a handwritten note. Final offer. Signed by 9 o'clock am Monday. No extensions. I burned the note. That evening, Elizabeth called. Our weekly Saturday ritual. Hi, Mom. How was your week? I hesitated. I was fired. The silence on the other end hurt more than I expected. Then, what? But your days from retiring. They can't. They did, I said. But I've got it handled. Do you want me to come home? I can fly and no. Just stay put. I need you to trust me. There was worry in her voice, but also something else. Pride. I ended the call and sat by the window as the rain returned. Everything felt fragile, like my life had become a house of glass. But I was not made of glass. I was still wrapped in silence. And on Monday, I would speak. Monday morning arrived with the dull gray sky of a Minnesota spring, promising nothing and warning everything. I dressed with precision: a navy blazer, pressed slacks, low heels, practical, grounded. A woman who was not afraid to walk into the fire. The federal building downtown was a fortress of concrete and glass, cold but clean. Gregory Santos met me in the lobby, older now than when he'd left Crew, but still razor sharp. His embrace was brief and professional. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. I've been ready for years. We took the elevator to the 17th floor, where the SEC's regional office overlooked the river. In a glass-walled conference room, I was introduced to Angela Brennan, an enforcement attorney, and James Weston, a forensic accountant. No smiles, just polite nods and legal pads. Mrs. Reynolds, Angela began. Before we proceed, do you understand the risks of this disclosure? I understand the consequences of not disclosing more, and so I told them. For 3 hours, I outlined the irregularities, inventory that didn't match invoices, backdated certifications, and accounting entries that reeked of manipulation. I presented emails, reports, spreadsheets, and even handwritten notes from meetings where I'd been told to drop certain lines of inquiry. James' pen didn't stop moving. Angela asked precise questions, digging deeper into dates, names, and motivations. And all of this began escalating when David Langston arrived. Yes, but the foundation was already there. He just turned cracks into chasms. When the meeting ended, They didn't shake my hand. Instead, Angela nodded with quiet reverence. We'll begin our investigation immediately. You've done your part. Now it's our turn. By the time I returned home, Gru was already unraveling. Janet from HR called in a panic. Melody, something's happening. The board called an emergency session. David's locked in his office. Legals. In a frenzy. Did you? I did what my job required me to do. They chose to ignore it. Tuesday morning, the air felt different, charged. The sky, once dull with April drizzle, now burned clear and cold. It was the kind of weather my late husband Thomas used to call truth weather, when nothing could hide in the shadows, and everything came into sharp focus. At T9 am sharp, my attorney Barbara and I walked into Gru Manufacturing's towering headquarters. The same glass walls that once gleamed with prestige now felt like the shell of a collapsing empire. Whispers followed us through the lobby like smoke. The security guard who had escorted me out less than 2 weeks ago gave me a sheepish nod. Welcome back, Mrs. Reynolds. I offered him a small smile. Thank you. It's good to be on the right side of the door. We were directed to the executive boardroom, a space that had once been forbidden to me, now open like a confession booth. Inside sat the bored older men and women who had once dismissed me with tight smiles and even tighter priorities. But today was different. Today, I wasn't just Melody Reynolds, Senior Compliance Officer. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. At the head of the table was Patricia Donovan, now acting CEO. She stood as we entered and gestured to 2 empty chairs. Melody, Miss Hart. Her voice was calm, but her posture betrayed strain. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Barbara folded her hands. We're listening. Patricia took a breath. First, let me say that your termination was not only improper, it was unethical. As of this morning, we've officially rescinded it. Melody is reinstated with full benefits, retroactive to the day of her dismissal. A few board members looked away. Patricia continued, sliding a folder across the table. Additionally, the company wishes to offer a settlement. It includes full pension vesting, 5 years' salary, lifetime health care, and a public letter of apology signed by the current board. I opened the folder slowly. Every word was there, signed, notarized, sealed. But I didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was damage control. And David Langston? I asked. Patricia's jaw tightened. Suspended, under criminal investigation, along with 3 board members. SEC enforcement is expanding. Will likely face class action lawsuits, shareholder demands, and fines. Barbara leaned forward. My client has no intention of being your public relations fix. She's here for accountability, not cosmetics. Patricia nodded solemnly. Understood. But we'd like her input formally. We're creating a new Ethics and Compliance Division. Independent, transparent, funded. I paused. You want me to lead it? No, Patricia said softly. We want you to design it. Retire on your terms, Melody, but leave behind the legacy you earned. I said. Nothing. I wasn't ready to decide. Not yet. As Barbara and I stood to leave, Patricia offered one last gesture, a simple envelope. We found this. It was in Langston's office. Marked, do not shred. You should see it. I opened it as we walked out. Inside was a printed email, an internal message from David Langston to the board. Subject: Compliance risks. Reynolds must go. Detailed a strategy, a timeline, exact dates. It confirmed what I already knew. My termination wasn't financial. It was tactical. Proof, I whispered. For anyone still pretending this was accidental, back in Barbara's office, we reviewed everything. The reinstatement, the settlement, the email. This changes everything, she said. It's not just unethical, it's retaliation with intent. If we go to court, they'll lose everything. I nodded. But maybe we don't need a courtroom. Maybe we just need to make sure it never happens again. That night, I sat on my back porch, watching the lake shimmer under a crescent moon. Elizabeth called, her voice bright. Mom, the Times ran a piece about you, called you the woman who blew the whistle, heard around the boardroom. You're trending. I laughed. The sound strange and unfamiliar. I'm not a trend, sweetheart. I'm a warning. She paused. Are you okay? I'm better than okay. I'm free. 6 months later, Gru's stock had stabilized under new leadership. 4. Board members faced federal charges. David Langston entered a guilty plea and was sentenced to 4 years for securities fraud, with a mandatory ban from corporate leadership. The ethics division I helped design became a model for several Fortune 500 companies. I declined the consulting offer. Instead, I founded the Reynolds Institute, an independent nonprofit focused on protecting corporate whistleblowers and training internal compliance officers to recognize, record, and report abuse. The SEC awarded me 15% of the fines levied against Gru, more than enough for a lifetime. But it was never about the money. It was about truth. And truth, I'd learned, has a way of surviving everything. Years from now, they'll teach my story in business schools. Some will call it revenge, others justice. But to me, it was always just this, doing my job. I was Melody Reynolds, Senior Compliance Officer, and I told the truth, even when no one wanted to hear it, especially then.